Hey, it's Ron, and before we get started, I've got a quick note. Today's episode deals with the topic of a sudden tragic loss. If that's something you'd rather not sit with right now, I completely understand. Feel free to skip ahead to the next episode. And with that in mind, I want to tell you a story about business and how that story changed everything. She had worked plenty of quiet Sunday shifts, the kind where the doors opened slow and the day eased along at its own pace. But this one wasn't quiet. She knew it the second she unlocked the gate. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating, texts from coworkers, missed calls from friends, notifications piling up with no context, just fragments of things like, "Is it true? Turn on the news. Please tell me this is wrong." As they always were, the store's TV screens were already synced to the sports networks, and every one of them was running the same breaking headline. She stood there, hands on the counter, trying to make sense of words that didn't fit together. A helicopter, Los Angeles, Kobe Bryant. She didn't need to hear the rest. The first customer came in before she even got everything open and set up, and he wasn't really shopping. He was just looking for something familiar to hold on to. He asked if there were any jerseys left, any style, any number. She walked him to the rack she had straightened the night before, only to realize he wasn't the only one coming. People were already lining up outside. Within an hour, the store felt different. Not busy, charged. Customers speaking softer, staff trying to keep up, jerseys disappearing from hangers, shoes, shirts, hats, anything with a hint of purple and gold being lifted off shelves by people who were grieving in the only way they knew how. At that moment on that day, she wasn't thinking about sales or foot traffic. She was thinking about how fast the world had shifted, how a player who had shaped a generation suddenly wasn't a current superstar anymore. He was a legacy, and she was watching that legacy turn into something bigger, heavier, and harder to define right in front of her. But how does a normal retail shift become the front line of a global movement of grief? Why does a player's sudden absence turn everyday merchandise into something closer to remembrance? And on January 26, 2020, how did the news of Kobe Bryant's death transform simple stores around the country into places where a generation came to process what they had lost? From Business Basics, I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the daily podcast where we explain the stories that changed business forever. Every date of the year has a story where business reshaped the world. Today, January 26, that story takes us to 2020, when legacy, unfortunately, became the franchise. By the time Kobe Bryant retired in 2016, he wasn't just leaving basketball. He was stepping into the second phase of a career he'd been building quietly for years, one where an athlete became a full-scale enterprise. Shoe lines weren't merchandise, they were global supply chains. Training philosophies weren't slogans, they were intellectual property. And his curiosity had shifted from the court to everything connected to it. He had founded Granity Studios to create stories, films, and books. He invested early in consumer brands, most famously putting $6 million into a sports drink company called Body Armor, a stake that would eventually be worth hundreds of millions. He built the Mamba Sports Academy, a hub for training the next generation. And he leaned into international markets where his name was as recognizable as any corporate logo. Kobe Bryant wasn't simply a retired player. He had become a diversified portfolio. That's what made the news on January 26 hit differently. It wasn't just that Kobe was gone. It was that his daughter, Gianna, and 7 others were with him. Families were changed forever. Communities were shaken. And inside every business connected to his name, from footwear to film to youth sports, the reality set in that a living, evolving brand had suddenly become what we call a legacy brand. That team store manager didn't know any of the business details yet. She only knew what everyone else knew. A global figure with a larger-than-life presence had disappeared in an instant, and the world was trying to absorb the loss while standing in line, some of them at her register. The turning point didn't come from a press conference or an official statement. It came from the behavior she saw inside the store. By late morning, the jerseys were gone. By early afternoon, even the sizes nobody ever bought had disappeared. Customers weren't browsing, they were searching for something tangible to hold on to when the news still felt unreal. And every item taken off a shelf became more than apparel. It became a memorial. She watched the shift happen in real time. Items that had moved slowly for years were suddenly irreplaceable. People asked for anything with an 8 or a 24. They asked about youth sizes, even when they didn't have kids. They asked if any of the older designs were in the back. Some bought multiple pieces, not to resell, but to give to friends who couldn't bring themselves to leave the house yet. Across the city and far beyond it, the same pattern repeated. Nike's supply vanished. Tribute merchandise sold out globally. Social feeds filled with videos, stories, and highlights that drove viewing numbers into the stratosphere. Media companies shuffled their programming. Brands paused campaigns. Investment firms reran valuations on businesses Kobe had touched, not because anyone wanted to capitalize on the day, but because the world's attention, emotion, and spending had turned toward a legacy all at once. For that manager, the business mechanics weren't theoretical. They were happening at her counter. Grief was driving demand. Demand was reshaping inventory. And inventory was shaping how people processed what happened. She wasn't selling jerseys. She was processing impact. One transaction, one conversation, one moment of disbelief at a time. The world had lost a person. Businesses were realizing they had lost a partner, a creator, and a cornerstone of a global brand.
Obtén tu diploma de secundaria por ti y por tu familia. Visita completatudiploma.org para encontrar centros educativos gratuitos cerca de ti. Presentado por Dollar General Literacy Foundation y The Ad Council.
In the weeks that followed, the shock didn't fade, but the picture became clearer. Kobe Bryant had left behind more than memories. He left behind a set of businesses, investments, intellectual properties, and programs that all needed attention. His storytelling company continued to sell books. His stake in Body Armor became part of one of the largest beverage deals in years. Youth sports organizations recalibrated to honor commitments he had made personally, and every company tied to his name had to navigate something that most brands plan for abstractly, but rarely confront directly: how to manage a legacy when it happens overnight. And understand, the transition wasn't about profit. It was about what we call stewardship. Families, partners, lawyers, and executives worked not to replace him, that was impossible, but to understand how to protect what he had built. That meant agreements had to be reevaluated, licensing had to be renegotiated, and projects had to be assessed for whether they matched the vision he was shaping before he was gone. The marketplace wasn't chasing a trend. It was adjusting to a sudden vacuum around one of its most influential figures. For that store manager, the shift showed up quietly. Weeks later, she still saw people walk in with a different posture. Not necessarily looking for the newest thing, but for something that felt connected to a person they weren't ready to let go of. Inventory stabilized, but the meaning of that inventory didn't. Kobe's jerseys didn't return as seasonal products. They returned as permanent fixtures, part of a story that would outlive the moment. And maybe that's when she realized legacy isn't a slogan or a statue. In the business world, it's a long-term structure. decisions, rights, partnerships, and responsibilities that continue long after a career ends. And that transition from celebrating an active star to safeguarding a global legacy began on January 26, 2020, the day Kobe Bryant's helicopter went down. I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the podcast that finds the turning points behind the headlines. To hear more stories like this, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And if you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps more people find the story behind the business. And if you want to actually understand business without the fluff or the buzzwords or the MBA language, start by visiting bsnsDailyPodcast.com.
We all crave something new. At Hertz, new is what we're all about. New adventures, new experiences. When you book with us, you'll be cruising in our newest fleet yet. New features, new tech, and of course, that new car smell. All that wonderful newness, all with no strings attached. So go on, book your new car fling at Hertz.com. Your old car at home never has to know.